Dr. Dennis R. MacDonald, welcome back to Myth Vision. Thank you for joining me.
No, thank you, Jerry.
If you haven't gotten this book yet, you will burn for all eternity. Okay, so, let me put it another way. You're missing out on life. I meant it as a metaphor. Sincerely, his latest, greatest. It literally is a synthesis of all of the much more weedy, rigorous academic stuff into a much more narrative form, understanding, stories that are told between the gospel authors, engaging, debating, agreeing, complimenting, critiquing, etc., on why the authors are writing different stories about Jesus. And it's that simple. But one of the things you do in this book, Dennis, that I'm not going to lie, like it was this recent interviews that we've done where it's like Q hit me different. Okay, I don't like calling it Q. The reason is it's like saying I'm an atheist. I'm going to tell you, it really is. The online community, I'm not talking about the academics because they don't see it as a they have no problem with using the word Q. Online, people are so critical, so skeptical, and don't have the background knowledge that when they hear the word Q, they go, huh? Well, they can't argue that Papias had two Matthews. So I prefer to just use the language of there were existing two gospels that looked similar, right? One is Matthew and one is like Matthew, and that's the logoi. And so when you describe the logoi, right, we're getting into the weeds here, and we're going to have to. I want to paint a picture for people so they understand. The typical Q, logoi scholarship, doesn't use Mark. They find what's in common between Matthew and Luke, and they say, you know what? This is not in Mark, but they shared in common, and it's very probable with the constant copying of Mark that they're also copying some earlier source here. Now, you're the first person I've ever talked to who talks about Q and says, the greatest witness of Q? And I'm thinking, yeah, Matthew and Luke. And you're like, no, Mark. And I'm going, hold on, because I thought they're just using Mark as kind of a jump off to know what's different from Mark, and therefore it is just another witness to showing there's an earlier gospel. And that's one way of looking at it, but then you're like, no. There are episodes in Matthew and Luke that share with Mark, but their versions are more primitive. And you have to ask yourself the question, why the hell is Matthew and Luke using an episode from Mark and not just writing it as Mark writes it or spinning it a little different? Why are they seeming to have more archaic forms? Where did that come from? And is that not commonly shared material that also Mark has with Q? So it's in the weeds here. We're also going to address, is there any pre-70 AD material you think that is also in the Q? But let's start with that first issue, if you don't mind.
Okay, I want to clarify a couple of things in your comments.
Okay.
By logoi, you mean the logoi of Jesus.
Right.
And that's its likely original title. And Q comes from the initial of Quelle in German, meaning a source, like a spring. And so one understands why you have that Q designation. I think it's unfortunate when we know that it probably was the logoi of Jesus, and it was to compete with the logoi of Moses in Deuteronomy. So we'll start with that. Now, when I say that Mark is the most important witness to Q, that doesn't mean that it's the most extensive witness to the Q document.
Right.
The importance of it is that it's the earliest, and one can see that the author is wrestling with the content of Q plus or logoi, whatever. Now, let me tell you something of a brief history of a Q scholarship. And you did mention some of it, but I want to carry it further.
Please.
Scholars already at the very early 19th century recognized, especially in Europe, that Matthew and Luke had content that was similar to each other that they didn't receive from Mark.
Right.
They also recognized correctly that sometimes the wording in Matthew was earlier and sometimes Luke's wording was earlier, and sometimes it vacillated inside the same verse.
Which, if you don't mind me chiming in, which makes this synoptic problem difficult on knowing Matthean. Is it Matthean priority before Luke, or is it Lucan priority before Matthew? And there's these like tug of wars that you get from people who say, why is this older, but it's using Matthew?
Well, it's less that the scholars are differing with each other. They're differing with the material.
Okay.
Because the material sometimes is earlier in its Matthew version or in Luke's version.
Okay.
And scholars can agree that you have that disagreement. So what happens with the far hypothesis, the Q deniers, if you will, they say, no, Luke knows Matthew. So you can say that some of those alterations are not oscillating priority to a lost gospel. They're simply Luke screwing around with Matthew. Well, that seems to make sense. But Q scholars, and by the way, Q scholars then have tried to purge Matthew and Luke of any influence from Mark in order to have a pure Q. That makes sense at one level. But scholars recognized over and over again, especially Harry Flaterman. You may not know the name, but he was a very important Q scholar who said he insists on the Q document and shows that Mark knows Q.
Yeah.
And the reason that you can say that is, and this is really in the weeds, Matthew and Luke both have doublets. That is, they have one saying from Mark, and they have the same saying from somewhere else, and so they have a duplication. In every case, one can make an argument that the non-Markan one is more primitive.
Gotcha. So where did that come from, which simply says, here's a witness to a source?
And there are about a dozen examples of that in both Matthew and Luke. Then you have conflations. Conflations are where you see Matthew or Luke and they have something that comes from Mark, and they have other stuff that's added into it that potentially is more primitive and that Mark's secondary. So this is coming from somewhere. Now, some people would say, well, it means it's an oral tradition.
Right.
And Matthew and Luke and Mark know this tradition and so on. But so many of these changes in Mark are strategic. And
it rules out the orality in much more of a strategy intentional by a literary author who's crafting something.
Exactly.
Right.
And the material that is not Markan, but it shares with Mark these saying, comes from a different social identity. So that it actually has a coherent theology, if you will, or ideology. It has a consistent understanding of the kingdom of God and what was wrong with Judaism according to the early Jesus tradition and so on. So it has a coherence to it. And it's a beautiful coherence. Now the Q plus Papias hypothesis, I don't want to go into the weeds on that, but simply to say that its emphasis is solely on reversed priority.
Right.
Luke knows Matthew. But often when he's got parallels to Matthew, his version is earlier than Matthew.
Right.
Where is he getting it? He's not getting it from Matthew. And the advocates of the Farr hypothesis who deny are scrambling to explain why these things are earlier.
Are they often trying to explain it by saying Luke intentionally is trying to make it sound primitive? So rather than saying, which they're commonly copying material that's older, to get rid of the earlier source, they go, no, Luke invented a more primitive version, even though Luke comes after?
It's not that he's trying to get... They're trying to say that you can explain what Luke has as earlier by various sleights of hand.
Do they deny? So okay, let me give you examples. So tell me if I'm right here. So we're having a back and forth. is some of their forms of saying, no, we deny that that's more primitive. So sometimes they'll just be in denial of primitivity in some cases. In some cases, they'll say, nope, that's just total ex nihilo invention of Luke. And so it looks more primitive, but it's not really more primitive. Luke just made it look more primitive.
Yeah, those are the kinds of arguments. Probably the best known one is the Beatitudes in Luke's version are much shorter and probably more primitive than what you find in Matthew. So Mark Goodacre goes out of his way to say, no, Luke's the secondary one, and what you find in Matthew is not. That makes absolutely no sense. And so there's been a big debate about it. So this kind of forced argument that Luke is secondary to Matthew just doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
And so the reverse priority and a few other criteria are needed in order to fill the gaps. Tells you that there is this body of stuff that all three gospel authors knew and were working with. And here's some of the fun things about it. It was written before the Jewish War. It was not written by a Christian. It was written by a Jew. And that was one of the reasons that Christians rewrote it and didn't survive. It didn't survive because it really is a Jewish document. Jesus is called the Son of God and the Son of Man, but not the Christ, who is the hero of the Davidic family that becomes so important, for example, in Paul or elsewhere in Christian texts.
So Paul shares that with Q.
It has a distinctive social identity. Its enemies are Pharisees, not chief priests. And chief priests are never mentioned in the Q document, even though they know that the author knows that Jesus was crucified in Judea. It's by Romans, it's not by chief priests. So,
is that due to the fact that you're suggesting maybe Q is unaware of the temple's demise, and so you bring in chief priests from the temple once you already have a temple's demise?
Well, he could have done it because he also knows that Jesus was crucified.
Right. So
we don't know how much he knew, the author or the tradition from Galilee would have known the circumstances of Jesus' death. I think it's basically Mark creating the chief priests as the problem. But they never get mentioned. There's no Christ thing. There's no resurrection story.
Right. It's a total...
which is so important for the Christian identity.
It's kind of an apotheosis in a way.
So you have this distinctive theology going on in this collection of materials. Now, it is difficult to put it in the right sequence, and there are probably things that are missing. I'm sure there are. In fact, I have little essays on what may have been in Q, but we couldn't survive because of this or that.
Right.
So that's the big issue. And so when you have so many examples in doublets and conflations and other examples of Mark knowing this material, Mark must have known it. And Harry Flaterman and others are responsible for the modified two-document hypothesis. And this is one that escapes almost anybody, even scholars. There was from the very beginning of the Q hypothesis a group of scholars who insisted that Mark must have known the document too. And my predecessor at the School of Theology, Burton Mack, was a believer in that. Then I mentioned Harry Flaterman several times. But there's a whole school of Q scholars who argue, yes, Mark must have known Q.
Right.
That certainly is the case. Now, his Q collection is not as vast as it is in Matthew and Luke.
Right.
But it is early, and it shows because of the polemic that Mark is involved with. It draws a clearer line between the Q experience and the early Christian experience in terms of social identity.
Gotcha. And so real quick, as we're going to be moving, I think we need to get into the timeline for a moment. A few examples that you see in these texts that tell you this was written before 70 AD.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it.
Do that, because In that, remind me if I forget, I want to also address the social identity of Christians versus Jews, because with the gospel development, we also now are being aware that there is a rift. There is actual rivalry at this point between the earliest, most primitive Jewish Jesus movement and what has now become a new identity.
That's why we have feuding gospel authors.
Get you a copy.
And a major section of it is an argument between the author of the Q document and Mark on this very question.
Okay, what page?
Social identity. Well, no, it actually goes for about 100 pages. But
Okay.
so what we're going to do is we're going to look at page 305.
305.
This is my translation of my reconstruction, Greek reconstruction of
Okay.
the Logoi of Jesus. And on page 305, if you go to the very bottom paragraph,
Everyone who divorces.
yeah, that's the paragraph.
Okay.
But we're going to pick things up at verse 15.
Okay. Would you like for me to read?
Yes, so if you bring your gift.
So if you bring your gift to the altar and there remember that your brother holds something against you, leave your gift there before the altar, go, and first be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift.
Now, does that look like the temple is still standing?
It seems like it. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be foolish without it.
Right, because where are you bringing your gift to, right?
Yeah,
Like, clearly.
And you'll notice that it's not underlined.
And which gospel is this in?
This is in Matthew, but it's not
Okay.
in Luke. That's why it's not underlined.
And this is also stuff that scholars would identify in Q.
Some do and some don't.
Of course. Of course.
Because if the criterion is Matthew-Luke overlaps, it doesn't work.
It just
But
is odd, too, if you think about it. I mean, this is, like, there's no way to prove, but this is such good evidence, because you kind of have to go, we know Matthew knows the temple's down, okay? We already know the commission to the nations has already taken place. This is, like, come on, the temple's down. We know Matthew 24 is so explicit about that, and then you read this and you go, I mean, why would you even add this in there? Why are you even telling this?
You do it because you want to show that Jesus was faithful to the temple.
Right.
You want to show that he was a bona fide Jew, and that he was in fact honoring sacrifices to the temple. And you saw it in the Q document. And Luke just wasn't going to go there. He knew that the temple had been
he doesn't want it.
50 years ago, half a century ago.
Gotcha.
So we're going to turn now to page 306.
Okay, I'm there.
At the very bottom of the page,
Yes,
you
sir.
see the story of Jesus healing the son of a centurion, a Roman centurion.
Uh-huh.
And he says, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith.
Yes. What verse is that, though?
That's at the top of 307.
Okay.
Page, this is verse 50.
I see it. But Jesus, on hearing, was amazed and said to those who followed, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. And Jesus said to the...
Mark sees that, and he will not have it. He changes it to Jesus at Capernaum healing a paralytic who's Jewish, and his friends give him...
Matthew changes it?
Mark does.
So Mark makes him heal a Jew instead of having him heal a centurion.
Yeah,
son.
and the Jews have more faith than the centurion. That is, he heals the paralytic because these poor men who bring him into the house show faith. So, and this issues of authority and so on. Mark, I mean, it takes place in Capernaum, by the sea. I mean, it's all there.
Yeah.
And Luke comes along and he doesn't like it, and he says the centurion never meets Jesus. Jewish authorities come and say, you need to help this guy's son because he built synagogues for us. He's
God-fearer. Yeah.
Yeah. So let me give you another.
Okay, and now how does that sound pre-70 to you? I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
I can't imagine a Jew after the Jewish war thinking that a centurion has more faith than anyone in Israel.
Gotcha. Okay. You could see that before.
And Mark certainly would not say that.
Is it possible, I'm just thinking, Is it possible that after the war, they're constructing a narrative like that in light of the fact that Israel has failed? So, like kind of like it says, people will come from the east and the west, this kind of foreshadowing of like, Israel's not getting it.
I think that's an interesting possibility.
Okay.
But I just don't think that makes any sense in terms of what Mark is about, because Mark is so hostile to Rome.
I agree. Yeah. I just figure, this is in Matthew though, right? The centurion story.
The centurion story
is
in
Matthew. Yeah. That's why I was thinking in Matthew, this material, there's this constant, people will come from the east and the west, like you children of Israel aren't going to get it. And that's why I was thinking that material, Matthew, could potentially be a Christian-ish.
Yeah, and the text that you just mentioned is a Q staying.
Okay, gotcha.
From east and west and so on.
Oh, so it's still part of the new kingdom. Got it, okay.
Let me give you 2 more examples.
Okay.
Same page. If you look at the last full long paragraph at the bottom of 309.
309?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah,
okay.
309.
Woe to you.
Yes, but you're going to begin with the at the end of the first underlining. Woe to you, nomikoi, who say. Do you see that? Okay.
Woe to you, nomikoi, who say, whoever swears an oath by the sanctuary has no obligation, but whoever swears an oath by the gold of the sanctuary has an obligation. For which is greater, the gold or the sanctuary that sanctifies the gold? And whosoever swears an oath by the altar has no obligation, but whoever swears an oath by the gift that is on it has an obligation. For which is greater, the gift or an oath by the gift that is on it has an obligation. For which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? So the one who swears an oath by the altar swears an oath by it and by everything that is on it. And the one who swears by an oath by the sanctuary swears an oath both by it and by what resides in it. And whosoever swears an oath by heaven swears an oath by the throne of God and by the one who sits on it. Woe to you, Pharisees.
No, that's fine.
So that's like, what the hell are you doing talking about all this, sanctuary oath this, oath that? Like, what's that doing in there?
Yeah, and it's boring.
It's so boring. Yeah. It's so, well, I mean, it might not be to like a Pharisee.
Yeah, right.
But like, clearly this is like, I can't see Christians giving a crap about that, to be honest with you.
Matthew does. Matthew saves it. Luke doesn't.
You know what I mean, though.
Mark doesn't.
And you said Luke doesn't, right?
No.
Yeah, I don't blame him.
Mark doesn't. And it's because this only makes sense if you've got a sanctuary to swear by.
Yeah, I think that for me, the first one and this one is even more solid to me than the centurion one, only because I can find a wiggle way out of the centurion one. I don't know how the hell you're wiggling out of this. This is so lock solid.
The next one's best.
Okay, let's see it.
The next one is the most important. This is page 310.
Okay.
I'm going to read it.
Yes, sir.
But I'm going to change a few words because I'm going to use the Matthean version, and you're going to be reading the Lucan version of this Q saying.
Okay.
Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And by the way, if it's underlined, it means that it appears in both Matthew and Luke.
Gotcha.
The same way. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children as a hen gathers her nestlings under her wings, and you were not willing. Look, your house is a wilderness. You see what the difference is?
Yeah, forsaken.
Yeah. I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And then the Q document, in my view, surely said, I will destroy this sanctuary that is made with hands and build another that is not made with hands. That Jesus is threatening, when I come back as the Son of Man, I'll destroy this temple and build another not made with hands.
Wow.
After the destruction of the temple, you know that the Romans destroyed the temple.
Right.
And nothing has taken its place.
Right.
So Mark is trying to save this problem by saying it was false witnesses at the cross who said that he made this threat. But their witness did not agree, and therefore Jesus is absolved of this business. Now, notice the difference. Matthew says, look, your house is a wilderness.
Right.
That implies that he knows that the temple has been destroyed. And
Right.
you rightly pointed to Matthew 24, where it's clear that the king has sent his troops to destroy the city and all that. He knows that. But in Luke, the house is forsaken by God, but it still exists. And we know this because of the Roman practice of calling out the gods from a city so that the gods no longer protect the temples, and therefore the Roman army can come and conquer it.
Right.
So in Matthew, the Q saying says it's already gone.
Right.
And there's no threat to destroy the temple. Luke doesn't have the destroy the temple either, but he says God is not going to protect it any longer. That's from the Q document.
Okay.
The Q document says it's forsaken, and now it's going to be in trouble because God's not going to help out. And by the way, Josephus says the same thing.
So, okay.
Josephus gives a speech to people who says, because of our nonsense, we cannot count on God to protect the temple any longer. And John Kloppenborg has written a wonderful essay on this, Evocatio Deorum, I think it's called, the calling out of the gods and it was a common Roman practice. Before you attack the city, you take care of the gods, so that the gods are permitted to leave,
Right.
so then you can attack. So that the Q document did not say the temple is destroyed.
Right.
Matthew says it. Q says it's no longer protected, and now.
Gotcha. Now, can I set the book down?
Yeah.
Because there's so much. You got to get the book, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, let's discuss that for a second and then talk about social identity. So the temple, this is something that a lot of people who are online probably already assume that are critical or skeptical, and that is, if Jesus mentions the temple may be destroyed or it's going to be destroyed, even if he says he himself will do it, there have been people who try to interpret that as judgment coming on the clouds, right? Well, when you go to the Old Testament, you find like cloud language where God comes and destroys Babylon, right? These things. So they see it as metaphorical language that God's going to come and destroy this temple. What I'd like to have you maybe explain or even describe the best you can for our audience is that it obviously doesn't take a miracle to see the writing on the wall, the signs on the wall of problems coming. I mean, you can see it decades out often. You can say, nah, something's going to happen. It's not like they didn't have Jewish scripture where the temple was destroyed once before. So they clearly have scriptural precedent for this happening in light of the corrupt, behavior and sins of Israelites at the time, which Babylon came and conquered. And the excuse was, hey, God destroyed you because of your wickedness. Here he is doing it again, so to speak, like the prophets. He's saying, hey, no. And it's a new law, new Moses, so to speak, figure of Jesus coming on. I always looked at it before getting into this critical that maybe there could have been a guy who said, hey, that this temple's probably going to come down. It's bad juju. You just said Josephus mentioned this. Now, does Josephus say that he was saying this before it actually happened? That he was already having the idea that the temple's going to come down?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Josephus definitely wrote it after the Jewish War.
Of course.
And one needs to be skeptical about Josephus fabricating this beautiful speech to rebels in Jerusalem.
With Jesus ben Ananias.
I don't know. I'm skeptical,
of course,
about that. But Josephus knows the tradition of gods abandoning cities and therefore not protecting the city from enemies because of the sins of the city and so on. So right. that part is there.
That's why I was just thinking, when I hear Jesus is predicting in some way, shape, or form, whether he's correct or wrong about the means by which it seems it took place, because some people will interpret Jesus, who is with the Father, did destroy the temple by using the Romans. So I've heard this, like lots of Christians will go, the judgment did come as he predicted. that the temple's demise was done by the hand of God. He had said it was going to happen, and of course, him and his father, played a part in that in some way. Anyway, I know that's theological stuff, but my question is as a skeptic, someone who's reading this, is it not as plausible of suggesting that this material with Jesus saying, hey, the temple's going to come down, may be a post-70 insertion?
No, not possible.
So you think it's pre, for sure?
It's got to be.
And the reason it's got to be, in your view, is that he's wrong. He didn't do it.
Yes.
And then he didn't rebuild a temple.
And he said, and you look, your temple, your house is forsaken.
Right.
And you will not see me until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.
Right.
Because I'm going to be coming. And so what am I going to do then? I'm going to destroy the temple and build another.
Without hands, human hands, correct?
Without human, yeah.
Now, is that in Q?
Yes.
Without human hands?
Yes, but not after 3 days.
Okay, that part, yeah, that clearly. Yeah. So then my question about the not with human hands part is that someone might go, that's more, that's the kind of the temple is now the church, right? And they'll go to Luke and say, oh, the kingdom of God lives in me. And so they'll say, like, it's not built with human hands, it's the Spirit of God and all that kind of stuff. They go down this path rather than saying, no. Jesus had in mind, like, an actual temple that would be replaced that God builds.
Okay, well, we've been talking about the destruction of the temple and whether the Q document anticipated the destruction of the temple, but was written before the destruction of the temple. And the author's perspective was that Jesus would return like Elijah or Moses and reestablish a kingdom of Israel that's on earth, apparently. Now, I want to take a swipe at Bart Ehrman.
Okay.
Bart Ehrman is an advocate, although a tentative one, of saying that Jesus himself was an apocalyptic character. I don't think he was. And I think the evidence is really quite striking that he was not apocalyptic.
Wow.
Now, before I get into that evidence, there's another thing I wanted to mention. When Mark gets a hold of the Q document, he is not going to accept for a moment a earthly kingdom. And he doesn't say anything about these thrones being given to the 12.
That's Matthew and Luke.
There will be a throne in heaven where people will sit on their various sides, but that's reserved for martyrs.
Right.
So it's not for the living people. It's for the dead and so on. Mark gets a hold of that and he says, no, when Jesus comes back, he'll collect the elect and put them in clouds and whisk them off to heaven.
Right.
So there's no earthly kingdom in the Gospel of Matthew. Now, fundamentalists, I want you to figure out a way to put that together. Yeah. I mean, that's clearly a difference. And you may not like Q, but it's in Matthew and Luke. So, you still have to figure that one out. But let's go back to Bart Ehrman.
Okay.
I don't think Jesus understood. Jesus must have had an eschatology of some kind, because most Jews did. And there certainly is a sense of judgment that is early in the tradition and so on. But from the beginning, Jesus is, for the Q document, the Son of God. But he doesn't reveal himself as the Son of God. Not in Mark, but not in the Q document. Instead, when he calls his disciples, he's just been offered all the kingdoms of the world by the devil.
Right.
He calls his disciples and he says, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He's homeless. And he stays, and he tries to keep his identity a secret to everyone but his disciples and the Gospel of John, and the disciples of John. Mm-hmm. And that's who he reveals that he, in fact, is the promised prophet like Moses, who can redefine Mosaic law. It's only later, when his disciples have proved themselves faithful, that he identifies that he is the Son, and no one knows the Father but the Son, and to whom the Son reveals him. So you have a messianic secret already in the Q document. Now, here's something you may not know. Nobody, no Christian literature identified Jesus as the Son of Man before the Q document. And the earliest mention of the Son of Man in the Q document is just after the baptism, where Jesus says the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. That's the origin of the Son of Man tradition in Christian discourse. And the Son of Man usually is identified with other more heavenly figures in Judaism. But that is really important to say. As far as I can tell, and there is no contrary evidence to it, this saying in the Q document is the earliest manifestation of Son of Man in Christian discourse. In the rest of Logoi, when Jesus talks about his return, he talks about it almost exclusively as the return of the Son of Man. Now as the glorified Son of Man, as opposed to the diminished Son of Man. And by the way, the diminished or the penurious Son of Man is from Ezekiel, and the glorified Son of Man is from Daniel. And so there's a play on these two kinds of Son of Man.
Okay.
And I don't think Jesus would have identified himself either as Son of God or Son of Man. He's a prophet like Moses, who's trying to change Israel under the rubric of the kingdom of God. And so when you see all of this stuff about the Son of Man, I think the most natural interpretation of it, it's not the only one, the most natural interpretation of it is that the Q author or the tradition that he represents understood Jesus as the Son of God, but suffers as the Son of Man until the end, when God will vindicate him, and then he'll become the glorified Son of Man, as in Daniel.
Right.
So if you get rid of the Son of Man as eschatological sayings in Q, you don't have that eschatology. You don't have that apocalyptic image. And so my challenge to Ehrman and others who claim that, now I think Jesus may have been apocalyptic. I think he probably had an apocalyptic hope that things would change in the future. But my friend and former teacher, Dominic Crossan, has a good understanding, a better understanding of Jesus's attitude toward apocalyptic.
So you agree with Dom?
Yeast, it's like yeast that fills the bread.
Okay.
It's like a mustard seed that by itself grows, and so on. So it's an organic understanding of the growth of the kingdom of God to overwhelm Israel and to replace its harshness on marginal people with something more compassionate. That's how I would understand this.
Yeah, Dom has the same kind of thing. In fact, I didn't say this, but when you were talking about Q yesterday, and you were talking about then was the law and the prophets until John, and now the kingdom of God, that sounded like Dom to me. And I was like, hold on, okay, so he's getting into this idea of a realization of something now. But it's the here and now, and not like I'm waiting for angels to fly in from heaven and fix things. Now, what do you do with stuff that Schweitzer noticed? Like Matthew 10, which goes back to Q, it seems. He says, you will not have gone through all the houses in Israel before the Son of Man comes. Kind of indicating like he has this idea that maybe you won't even be able to get through all this before the end. The eschaton seems to happen. And he thinks that's a fossil because it's kind of embarrassing that it's still there, especially when, Paul's on this mission to the whole world, but like, it's in the mouth of Jesus where he's like, guys, you won't even have gone through all the houses in Israel before the end comes, like the Son of Man comes. So would you say that there's this hodgepodge of ideas that are going on here? I mean, how would you describe, you grant that there could be some apocalyptic stuff here. I think Dom's position, when I last talked to him, because we wrestled about this, Because I think that I feel like there might be more apocalyptic stuff there, and he doesn't as much. He has a different way of understanding it. I'm like, okay, let me wrap my head around this because I'm trying to really get it. And when I press Dom on it, Dom ultimately goes, look, Jesus probably had a more apocalyptic view before John's death. Once John died, he thinks that Jesus changed his mind about that in like how the apocalypse was supposed to unravel, and his whole theological view becomes kingdom now rather than eschatology, apocalyptic, idea that we've been having, like the typical Bart Ehrman position. It seems like a complicated mess to me. It's very hard to know for sure. But yeah, so I like went back and forth with Dom for a while about this. Maybe I need to have him back in here because he lives 40 minutes from here.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I should have had him meet you while you were here and just kind of do a three-way.
That would have been fun.
Yeah.
I have great respect for Dom.
Yeah.
And his heart is certainly in the right place of trying to make the Christian message manageable.
Yeah.
And compassionate. I think that's a convoluted solution. My solution is actually quite simple.
Okay.
The passage that you mentioned appears only in Matthew.
Okay, so it's not in Q.
It is in Q.
Okay.
And you can see why Luke would get rid of it.
Yeah, of course.
Because he wants to have a Gentile mission, and he doesn't want the mission only to go to Jews, and only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and so on. So Matthew retains it, and Mark knows of it too, and Mark won't have it because he claims in his Apocalypse that the end will not come until all the Gentiles have heard the message.
So he's Pauline in this, in a way.
Yes, and
Yeah.
he doesn't, and so he knows the Q document, but he's not going to go there. He's going to set the clock in a different way.
Right.
And this generation, he does it elsewhere too. This generation will not pass until all these things take place. So it's not the mission to Israel that's got to take place. It's all these other things, including the message to Gentiles. Now I'm going to finish.
Yeah, please.
Matthew doesn't like it either. He includes it.
He has to, in a way, he feels, right?
And then he changes it. At the very end of Matthew,
Great Commission.
it's the Great Commission. Go and teach all the Gentiles and so on. So what does that mean? That the statement, you will not finish your mission to Israel, the Son of Man will come. The Son of Man did come. He rose from the dead, he met the people in Galilee, and now he changes the schedule, and now the schedule is to the completion of the aging, the Gentiles are included. So Matthew knows it in Q. He changes it by the end of the gospel so that you know that this no longer applies. That was what Jesus said then, and then Jesus gives the commission at the end of the gospel.
It also kind of confirms that trajectory that Luke Acts does go when he's like first to the Jew and then to the Greek or to the Gentile and to the utter ends of the earth. So there is this already. Matthew, I think, is starting to really like give a mission to Israel, front row seat Israel mission, and then goes, all right, now we're doing this new thing. We got to go and really get all the peoples of the earth.
And by the way, I want to plug this book again because all of these discussions are here in this book, where Matthew and Mark and the Logoi of Jesus and so on are all discussing these kinds of issues.
Right.
So it's what we're talking about here is a good example of the book where these gospels are feuding with each other.
Gotcha.
And they're trying to make sense of, in this case, the Q document.
Okay.
Now, you wanted to say something about social identity, didn't you?
I think we've kind of nailed that, even talking about this whole, he's in the Jewish mission, and then, the Christian idea. So with what we know, it seems likely Mark's written after 70. And so by the time you get there, it seems like Matthew is like in a way in this tug of war. Like you said, he has to add in the Great Commission here, but he also really wants to emphasize a Judaizing mission as well. Likely a Jew of some sort writing this material. But when we get to Mark, we're already at a point now, like the way you see him change Q, since we know that he's using Q, but he also isn't using Q, he's like, nah. There's a Christianizing of Mark, of Jesus really with Mark. And a lot of Pauline overlap, like you just brought in this whole Gentile mission. Well, who claimed to have initiated that? Whose gospel was an apocalypse from God for that mission? Well, Paul clearly says, that's my job. That's what we do, which means somehow there's some awareness that Mark knows about a mission that's clearly Gentile and likely Pauline, which at this point, there seems to be a development where the Christian community is separating from that earlier Q kind of community, which we can't even say Jesus' community for sure. We know it's Jewish, but like, what's Q doing that may not be, we can't see behind that black wall. You see what I mean? Of like, what's behind Q? Who knows in terms of going back to the Jesus?
In social identity theory, there are three components. One is your in-group, who are the good guys. The other is the out-groups. Who are you different from? And often that builds hostility. Now, the in-group also is going to often have a prototypical leader, someone who articulates their values and can articulate a strident attitude toward outsiders. This is common sociology. What we can say that in the Q document, Jesus and to some extent John the Baptist are prototypical leaders. And they surround themselves with ideal followers, namely the 12 disciples and other people who are interested in the kingdom of God. Now, who are the outsiders? The outsiders are Pharisees, clearly, the Jerusalem establishment, but without talking about the chief priests, but also Gentiles. And in the Q document, you have Jesus say, do not go the way of Gentiles. Do not go to cities of the Samaritans. Do not cast your pearls before swine and, feed the dogs.
Yeah.
Those are Gentiles and Samaritans.
Right.
Dogs and swine. Okay.
That's a hell of a Jesus.
That's a hell of a Jesus.
Yeah.
And the disciples are not to go to Gentiles, only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So here you have these animals, dogs, swine, and sheep. And the sheep are the insiders, and the dogs and the swine are the outsiders. Very few people have noticed all this stuff.
Right.
Okay. Mark is not going to have any of that. So with the Samaritan woman, she says even the dogs want the scraps from the table.
Oh, the Syrophoenician.
Syrophoenician woman. Even the dogs want the scraps. And so Jesus heals the daughter of a Gentile.
And doesn't Matthew turn her into a Canaanite?
Yes, he talked about a Canaanite, but then he has Jesus actually quoting the Q document quoting the Markan version. Anyway, that's complex.
I just think it's amazing, just to comment this, how quickly the teacher, the man himself, they're fighting against. They're fighting against the very, if Q is the man, and this is far back as we could technically go, that's a pretty, whoa. I mean, like a central message to the master himself is go to these people, stay away from these other people, only go to these people. The fact that Matthew preserves that and then has to go, all right, we were faithful to that, Lord. Like he has to keep it. And he does the most, I think, in preserving that message of like, look, we did what you said, but there were moments where there were hints at foreshadowing at what that thing's going to happen later. But we did what you told us, Lord. And there was times when God appointed times when a centurion or that Canaanite woman or whatever came, we did bless her, but we kept faithful to what you told us. And then at the end, it's like, open the door.
And Mark was even more radical because he dropped a lot of that stuff from the Q document. Now I want to go back. Let's go to Mark.
Okay.
Who's the prototypical leader in Mark? It's Jesus. But he's now not a teacher, he's the Christ. and he's famous for being a martyr, and a model martyr at that. Now, who is over here, the 12 were the in-group. For Mark, one of the 12 is Judas. Another of the 12 is Peter, who's disobedient. Mm-hmm. Two other disciples are James and John, and they will not sit on thrones unless they're martyred, and God is the one who's going to decide on that. So, and there's the possibility that Jesus's followers will not be faithful.
Right.
So there you have a criticism of the in-group. Now, who's the out-group? The out-group for the logo of Jesus is not Romans.
Right. It's Pharisees. It's
Pharisees.
He's at synagogues.
That's right. It's a Galilean problem. Now, he's hostile to Jerusalem, but not to chief priests. Chief priests are never mentioned in the Q document. They're mentioned 21 times in Mark, and they're the ones who are responsible for the death of Jesus.
But that makes sense
then
too.
So you have different prototypical leaders.
Right.
You have different interpreters, in groups, mm-hmm. and the out groups are different.
Right.
So you can see that you have the social identity struggle and it explains a lot of why Mark is changing Logoi the way it is,
right.
because it's got a different agenda.
And it's funny, what you're saying there too geographically makes sense for Samaritans and Gentiles in the Galilee, which would have been people and the outgroup for the people local to that region in Galilee, which Q seems to preserve, and Matthew also preserves. What I think is interesting when you're bringing in Mark is this seems to be a Christian now. He's some form of a Christian in the sense that he's presenting a view that is breaking away from the teacher in many respects, preserving much too, but like he's doing something completely different that Matthew's trying to say, hold on, you went too far here. I like this, but I don't like this. And that's why your book is so important in this dialogue of the social identity.
Yeah, it's a dialectic, that's right.
There's so much here, Dennis, that I hope people will take the time to read, check out the book, consider what's going on, the way you phrase it, and them having these conversations. I guess the takeaway in all of this is Mark is a witness to Q. Consider that. Look at that. Consider what Dennis is saying here, because there's something going on behind this. And it's a Jew. It's not a Christian. So you start to have the divide take place over time, so much so that by the time you get to the final version of John, really, John as we have it, you have someone who's not a fan of Jews. Acts paints all the guilt on Jews. Like, it went from Jews only, Israel only, do not go to the Gentiles and the Samaritans, to those people, those Jews, generally speaking. Like it wasn't specific. It wasn't just identifying only Pharisees. It's like Jews, that word gets used all like Jews in general get really demonized. How that social identity shifts in the New Testament is a mind-boggling thing. To see it go from a kingdom that was Jewish to a kingdom that was Gentile and anti-Jewish is just like, whoa. And you're going to tell me the pneuma was really guiding this? Anyway.
Okay, I know. I've got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
And it's related to the book, but it's not about the book. Does the diversity of these Gospels and their differences diminish your appreciation for them or enhance your appreciation of them?
I'll answer it the same way that Paula Fredrickson did when she was debating a rabbi on the Talmud. And the rabbi said, he critiqued her. He said, you read this material all wrong. You want to know the who, what, when, where, why, and how. He said, you're supposed to read these teachers to follow their moral truths and to apply them in your life. And she got up there and she gave him hell. And she said, you, Mr. Rabbi, have your religious experience through that kind of thing. And respect, you can have that. I have mine on understanding that in the 8th century, Rabbi so-and-so. Why did he say this? Well, because contextually, and so she has her own experience engaging with the material. And for me, honestly, the depth is so much deeper and so much more human that you can connect to. I personally want to say this as we end this episode, since we're wrapping up toward the end. For me, the celestial deified Christ and all that theology is boring now. The human fingerprint is more relatable and, to me, more engaging and more fun. Because I can connect to it. I can't connect to an abstract, platonic, ultimate beyond. Like, that's mental masturbation. Whereas here I can see the struggle. And these are real people with real problems, just like you and I.
Yep, there you go.
That's the humanity.
Yeah, that's it.
I hope I answered your questions.
No, you did indeed.
I ask the audience, please consider Dr. MacDonald's amazing work. This is truly one of the works he believes he should be known for. It takes a collective ideas of everything he's done on Q, Homer, literally everything just about, and puts it into a wonderful book that's fun story and a fictional dialogue amongst all these authors. So grab you a copy. The link will be in the description. Thank you for your time, Dennis.
Thank you, Dennis.